start, sir.
Good afternoon, my dear friend. In today's presentation, I am going to shed some light on the importance of being honest. In fact, I would like to read the importance of being honest from the feminist perspective. This presentation will be divided into two distinct but interrelated parts. One, that is, I am going to talk about feminism, feminist criticism, feminist reading, especially feminist reading of a literary work, and that too by a male writer. Obviously, in the second part, I would like to focus on the text and how it can be read from the feminist perspective, how Wilde has at once reflected the society of his day and critiqued some of the basic assumptions based on and dictated by patriarchal norms. We all know that feminism and feminist criticism, though interrelated, are different. In fact, feminist criticism, feminist reading of a text, tries to utilize the tools and insights of feminism as a theory, an ideology, and a perspective in order to read, reread, and critique what is, and in the process suggest what ought to be in some ways. Now, feminist reading of a literary text often tries to describe how women and women's issues are treated in a text by a writer. Here, sometimes certain misjudgments are formed and misunderstandings are created because of a simple mistake. In every literary work, there is a reflection, a description of the social picture of the day or any day that is being represented. Thus, if a work deals with the milieu of the day, obviously the contemporary social situations are laid bare. If on the contrary, there is a historical work, a historical novel or a historical play, for example, then it becomes a bit complicated because two particular periods are directly or indirectly presented in and through the text. One, the narrated period, the period of the story, and obviously the predominant, prevalent social reality of that particular narrated period is brought to the fore, explained away, or described at any rate. But at the same time, certain assumptions, both imaginative and real, of the narrating period, that is the period of the writer, are superimposed on this representational matrix thereby creating a kind of a palimpsest. We all know that the importance of being earnest is a Victorian play written in the 1890s. And both the narrating time and the narrated time in this text, at least, is the same. So obviously, the assumptions and the realities of that time, the late Victorian time, in England, are what we should be concerned with and what Wilde was concerned with, importantly. Now, we all know that feminist reading utilizes the insights and tools of feminism in order to read a particular text, a particular author, a particular literary movement, or the presentation of a particular theme. In this text, if we want to point out how issues concerning women are treated, we have to remember the time, the Victorian time. This was the time of the suffragette movement. This was the time of the new woman. At the same time, this was also the time of Victorian propriety, prudishness, and patriarchal domination. So in a way, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And this play, through its satirical portraiture of men and manners, lays bare certain issues dear to the feminist critics. Critics like Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, Betty Friedan, and their ilk. Now, we know that feminist reading of a particular text tries to highlight the treatment of women and women's issues and the representation of that treatment. As a result, issues such as discrimination, silencing, commodification, especially sexual commodification, all these things become very important because the ultimate aim of feminism and its offshoot feminist criticism is not only to reveal how society treats women, but also to effect women's empowerment, culminating possibly in gender equality. Now, some of the very important issues of the Victorian times as they affected women are: number one, the place of women in society and also in the family. Number two, the question of self-improvement. And number three, obviously, love and marriage, especially marriage. Now, the role of and the place of women in society. The question of self-improvement of women and marriage as a career option. All these things are determined by the predominant patriarchal values. Patriarchy, or the rule of the father, is something that not only gave the rules, the norms, through its domination of the social space, but also meted out accommodation or rejection on the basis of an individual's acceptance of or resistance to the dominant social norms. In other words, there were certain social norms given by patriarchy, and an individual was accepted or rejected on the basis of whether he or she abided by those norms or inveighed against those norms. Now, in this presentation, I shall come to the second part of my thesis. Obviously, I will have to reread with you the importance of being earnest, the well-known play by Oscar Wilde, with a view to highlighting the issues that I have mentioned in the first part of my discussion. The main characters of this play are Jack, LG, Lady Bracknell, Gwendolen, Cecily, and obviously Miss Prism. Now, what are the issues concerning women that are mentioned in the play? Yes, there is the question of the role and place of women. As a natural corollary to this, there is also the question of self-improvement. And last but not least, there is also the important question of marriage and the various other issues like financial security, social status, and the private space of women, which Virginia Woolf would talk about later in A Room of One's Own. We all know that the patriarchy as a supremacist discourse tries to ensure and perpetuate its hold on social power by ensuring conformity. And sometimes patriarchy ensnares women in such a way as to make them serve patriarchy's end, sometimes even unwittingly, without knowing. Now, one of the women characters co-opted by patriarchy, who champions the patriarchal view, even though she is a woman, is obviously Lady Bracknell. She all the time thinks about her role or her place within the family by presumably making Lord Bracknell subservient to her. She is also the agent of patriarchy who tries to ensure ultimate conformity of patriarchal norms by Gwendolen, her daughter, through marriage. Here, by bargaining for the best deal in the marriage market for her daughter, what unwittingly Lady Bracknell does is to commodify Gwendolen without giving any thought to Gwendolen's wishes regarding marriage. Lady Bracknell tries to bulldoze all other considerations to her excessive fondness for the financial and social considerations. Regarding the role and place of women, Jack and LG, unfortunately, shows a very callous attitude. Not only do they deceive women by passing as Earnest, but also they entertain very, very damaging and retrograde views of women. For example, in course of one conversation, they say that the only way to behave to women is to make love to her, if she is pretty, and to make love to someone else if she is plain. So there is an inherent lack of respect and consideration in their attitude to women. Now, Gwendolen, for example, tries to achieve self-improvement. Not only does she attend the extension lectures of the university, she also reads and tries to improve herself. She is confident, self-willed. In this, she even says some of the traits of the proverbial new woman in her character. But at the same time, she is confident almost to the extent of a folly. She is so overconfident sometimes and forms so hasty judgments, such hasty judgments, that often she renders herself laughable and commits mistakes. For example, the way she prejudges Cecily ultimately backfires. She thinks Cecily Cardew is a very delightful name, and she, meaning Gwendolen, will love Cecily because her first impressions are never faulty. But ultimately, when she realizes to her horror that both Cecily and she love the same name. At least that is what she thinks. Then obviously she becomes very rude. She thinks that Cecily was a very, very calculating and deceitful woman, and that was her first impression of Cecily. Ultimately, however, being deceived by Jack and LG respectively, when Gwendolyn and Cecily learn about this, they form some kind of a tenuous attachment and alliance, and tries to wriggle out of this tight spot. But both of them are too much in love, and ultimately they are hell-bent on forgiving their errant lovers. But there is, in the case of Cecily, an added dimension of naivete. She has fallen in love with dear Uncle Jack's wicked brother, Earnest, without seeing him even. So obviously they are very gullible. But there is also some kind of a role reversal within this play. The two gentlemen who had tried to deceive their respective beloveds into marrying them, and thereby, at least for Jack, ensuring social respectability, because Jack considered himself as a foundling, and by marrying into the aristocracy, he could have regained some kind of a social status. Ultimately, the women show to the men that they are quite capable of holding on to their end of the bargain. In this context, the role of Miss Prism is also very important. Miss Prism shows the utter dependence of women on the social vagaries of chance. Her apparently snobbish mentality revealed in her attempt to write the 3-volume novel, a characteristically feminine pastime of the Victorian era, is ultimately backfires and leads to her social ostracism for a time being. Ultimately, however, she too is liberated from the stigma when every piece of the jigsaw falls into its proper place. So we see that Oscar Wilde has not only shown how women were treated, how men thought of women in the Victorian age, but also by revealing this, he was bold enough to critique and criticize this treatment of women. I hope this discussion will help you in rereading the play, The Importance of Being Honest, from a feminist perspective. Thank you for listening.